I would love to introduce our next speaker.
Okay.
We have Cynthia Gregory in the house with us today. She is an international best-selling author of the Love Notes anthology series. She is a sought-after international inspirational speaker. Lovely book there. She's going to talk to us how our brains are wired to be inspired. All right. So, one thing you may not know about Cynthia is that she was married in a 14th century monastery in Italy.
Nice.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And then she has, for one lucky winner, she is going to do a developmental review of your book. So, yes, if you haven't started and you want to get started, you can write that book. And guess what? You might win her prize and get it reviewed. And then for everyone, she has a beautiful mini journal notebook. So, welcome, Cynthia. Let's hear how our brains are wired.
Thanks so much, Dr. Melissa. I'm thrilled to be here. What a room. What an inspired room. This day has been phenomenal. I am Cynthia Gregory, publisher of the Love Notes anthologies, and I'm here to talk about how our brains are wired to be inspired. Here's a little secret I discovered why our brains are biologically wired for story, and that inspiration is one of our most trusted assets as a result. I personally, as a writer and a creator, I dwell at the intersection of story making and inspiration. And let me tell you what that looks like. I've always been in love with story, always. And anything to do with story, I'm inspired by it. I want to talk about it. I want to read about it. I want to do everything about it. It lights up a part of my brain, which is what makes it really exciting for me. It makes me super happy when I'm surrounded by story. And there's been so many wonderful stories in this room today. Lately, I've become very interested in what story does to our brain. And I thought, well, surely if story does something to our brain, so too does inspiration. And they're very similar in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm inspired to write, and that's one of the actions that I can use with inspiration. It's important because so too does inspiration and story both affect our brain and our dopamine and serotonin receptors. It makes us happy and we want to do more of it. There's more there, so bear with me. Inspiration is said to be made of three parts. First of all, is there's a suggestion or an idea is conjured up and we find that idea pleasing somehow. It lights up our brains. It actually really does light up our brains. MRIs have proven. And then we experience a sort of transcendent experience beyond ordinary everyday thinking. I had this happen to me yesterday when I was driving to the dentist. I had to pull over because the idea was so alive in my brain. I had to immediately write it down. And inspiration is a very vivid experience and unique in the moment that actually compels us to action. One of the interesting things that I learned recently about inspiration is that it's much like a dream. You get a brilliant idea, like a dream, you wake up in the middle of the night and go, oh, I'm going to remember this later. I'll do this later. But when you come back later, it's never quite as vivid. What you're really actually working with at that point is a sort of an echo. It's not quite as clear. It's not quite as alive. Has that ever happened to you where you put off an idea and then it didn't come back to you as clearly? So, as a writer, I know that there's a pattern that I follow. I hear or see something around me that pierces my heart, and I just know that this is a story for me to tell. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. Once, when I worked for the Red Cross Blood Services, there was a little boy who was born with a heart defect. And when he was 9 months old, he had to have open heart surgery. If you know anything about open heart surgery, it requires a lot of blood to keep the pump alive that keeps the heart alive while they repair it. And so, and we were the blood bank. And so he became our poster child. It was really lovely to be around him. When he was 3 years old, he still couldn't talk. He was doing sign language because he had been intubated so long. I saw his mom. I really zoomed in on her. She donated blood on a monthly basis. And I saw her looking around the room and realizing there were people in that room who saved her son, who likely could have saved her son. And I just thought that somebody should tell the story about this heroic woman, this heroic woman. And I guess that story was me, or that person was me. And I won several awards for that story because it was just so authentic. Another time I worked with a woman who was getting ready to retire, and she told me about a table she bought in Bali that she thought was really beautiful, and she put it on her front porch next to the front door to remind her every day to be mindful that that to be mindful of the space that she occupied. And this was about in the early 2000s when stories started to circulate about how icebergs were melting due to global warming and polar bears were drowning. And so I wrote a story, I combined those two elements and called this story Melting at Both Ends. And that won a bunch of awards. So, in my research for I Talk, I decided that we can be inspired by someone or something, and we can be inspired to be somehow different or changed, which is what I've heard a lot of people talking about here today. And I think that's a rather elegant design that we can be inspired, and by being inspired, we open ourselves up to more inspiration. I'm going to take you on a little journey from the allure of the creative expression, in particular storytelling, to inspiration, that elusive spark that compels us to recognize the magic of an idea and to run with it, to make something of it. So I started off as a hobbyist writer, and along the way, I morphed into an editor and publisher. I became a curator of story. I've always loved story, but in college, understanding how to make stories fired up a passion in me. I submitted literary short stories for years before I was accepted for publication. And then one day, I got a rejection slip in the mail with a little handwritten note on the corner that said, "This is really good. Don't give up." And that was the inspiration I needed. And I just kept going until I became published. I used to wonder how actors became a director or a producer, because I thought they're so good at acting. Why would they do that other thing? And now I know. The leap from making something solo with nothing but your own inspiration to guide you to making something in the spirit of collaboration and weaving many stories together is an extraordinary thrill. It's what I imagine conducting a symphony orchestra must be like with words. I was inspired to write love notes after I attended a silent retreat at a Benedictine monastery in Big Sur 3 years ago. A friend came to me and said, "I'm going to celebrate my 80th birthday in a silent retreat in Big Sur. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Yes, Big Sur, like Paris, is always a good idea." And so I went, and we had very bare bones, one person cabins facing the vast blue Pacific Ocean up on a hillside. And the monks were chanting in the background several times a day. And I was sitting out one morning reading Mary Oliver and being overwhelmed by the beauty of the place. And the scene didn't turn black like for Deb, but I very clearly heard a voice say Love Notes Anthology. And I felt like I'd been given a directive. So Love Notes 1.0 launched in 2024. Love Notes 2.0 launched last November, and we're currently enrolling authors for Love Notes 3.0, Profiles of Conscious Leadership. So many people in this room belong in that book, but I digress. That book is going to launch on February 14, 2027, with a foreword written by the fabulous Deb Drummond. I'm thrilled about that. Many times I write because I'm on a deadline. No inspiration needed. I just go right at it. Other times, inspiration simply surprises me at a time when I'm particularly receptive, and I recognize that if I don't run with it, I'll lose it. And I find that it's an interesting relationship between inspiration and creativity, because once we ignite creativity, it always leads us somewhere else. Like a river finding the sea, the current of creativity guides us to explore unknown territory. And even though we never know where it might lead, it always goes someplace interesting. Sometimes it ends up in a book. Sometimes I see other people's stories more clearly than they do, which is why I'm a book coach and a writing coach. It's a gift I have. Story is the language I speak. I can have a conversation with someone and understand their story better than they do. And then I mirror it back to them until they fall in love with their own story. And I help them become inspired by themselves. It's such an elegant magic. It's very fun. The effect of stories on our brains is that it releases a rush of dopamine, known as the feel-good hormone. I'm sure you're aware, and it gives us a sense of pleasure. It also gives us the motivation to do something. And as children, we're taught to read, and we start with fairy tales and fables. And as adults, we consume stories on many platforms for business, for well-being, for entertainment, especially. We tell our stories all the time. To Carmel's, Stacy's, and Melanie's point, we tell our stories to ourselves all the time. Our brains are wired for story. When we're little people and we don't understand how the world works, we're constantly making up stories, even on an everyday basis. We're constantly telling ourselves stories about what happened long ago, what happened, what might happen next, and can continually adapt and adopt these stories. So before written language, stories were purely functional. We handed down important information through storytelling, right? We wrote on cave walls. We told stories to help people remember how to be safe in that water. That water is not safe to drink, or that forest can be dangerous. I don't know if anybody saw the movie Hamnet when it was out a couple of months ago, but there's one vivid scene where Will Shakespeare's wife, Anne Hathaway, has a sick child, and she starts to sing a little song reciting herbal recipes and medicinal charms because songs were the technology that shared important information in those days. And that really struck me that moment. I thought it was lovely. Stories are everywhere and they're very useful, clearly. In sales training, we're taught to tell a story so our message will be better received. In nonprofit fundraising, there's a familiar motto. Forgive me, it is make them cry. And I used it many times in my career in nonprofit because this means tell a story that makes them feel something. Because large donations are not made with the head, they're made with the heart, and they're later justified with the head. It's all about the feeling. And you can't make somebody feel with facts necessarily. If you want them to remember something, you need to make them feel it. And stories do that. When we're told a particularly vivid story, it can embed a picture in our brains because we think in pictures and we dream in pictures. And MRIs have even shown that when we just hear a story, different parts of our brain light up and are activated. Stories can help us build new neural pathways that enhance all kinds of tools. And just for a very short list, that could be social connection, that could be empathy, it could be imagination. We can never fully walk in somebody else's path, but if we hear their story, we will generate empathy for that condition or for that experience. So when it comes to inspiration, we know how storytelling affects the brain. Inspiration is a deeply personal experience that borders on the mystical, insofar as I've experienced it. It resists manipulation. You can't trick it. It can't be commanded to appear at will. In other words, it's a little stubborn. It resists operationalization, interestingly, but it can be encouraged. Inspiration happens, we receive a transmission that seems from outside of ourselves. It creates an awareness of possibility that goes beyond the ordinary, much like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, in which the hero is invited into a journey where they must leave their ordinary world and transcend and go to another type of world to bring back the gift. I like to think that inspiration is made up of moments because when I feel inspired and all fired up, it's a beautiful rush and then it fades. So we can't always count on it. But what interestingly, inspiration contributes to neuroplasticity by allowing our brains to physically rewire themselves by making connections between new ideas, right? So as we get older, it's really important to be inspired and tell stories because we need that neuroplasticity. Inspiration can also activate the prefrontal cortex, which helps to align new ideas to values and goals, and then to beliefs and action. So it's a very useful tool and to keep it around in our world a lot. So while inspiration can be unpredictable, we can encourage it. If we want to have a relationship with it, we have to show up for it like anything else. We want to prepare our minds and senses to receive those sometimes subtle, sometimes thundering ideas. And to do that, it's best to be as consistent as we can. We want to accept what shows up and use it to the best of our ability. I think we have to allow ourselves to be inspired. I've gone through long patches of not being inspired, and I realized that it takes a consistent effort, and sometimes we have to work at it. Sometimes it's really easy to get in a rut because we're so busy. I think we make something like on the order of 35,000 decisions every day. Sometimes routine is just a comfort to us. But by doing something creative, by doing something without judgment or measurement or something outside of our ordinary world, we get that serotonin and dopamine release into our brains, which makes us much more receptive to those new ideas. I have three ways that you can bring more creativity and inspiration into your world, and that is to embrace novelty, get out of your rut, try something new, see a new movie, go shopping with a friend and have them pick an outfit out for you, and think in a new way. You can create stillness in an opposite way. Create stillness, meditate or lose yourself in nature without electronics. Explore the natural world in the woods, at the beach, experience these places with your senses and shut off the giant human brain and feel into the living world and listen to what it has to teach you beyond words, beyond ideas, just by being. Something that I did just this last weekend was to engage in a low effort creative project. I co-facilitated a women's retreat at a Buddhist monastery. And at one point in our program, we made magic wands and we all descended on these tables with feathers and ribbons and sticks and beads and jewels. And we were in this just delicious creative space. And it didn't really matter what the result was, although some of them were pretty fabulous. It was the expression of that creative spark within us. We let our inner child out to play, and it was very, very fun. I think it's more important today than ever to actively cultivate inspiration. We live in a digital world that makes it way too easy to tune out, to abdicate our role as cultural creatives, to strive to be constantly entertained by our devices, to bypass our own creative spirit. And I think I've come to know this in my years of creativity and being inspired, that when we open ourselves to the infinite supply of inspiration, to the great mystery, the vast unseen and unknown can make itself known to us with the spark of an idea that literally conjures images in our minds and lights up our brains in such a way that we feel we must do something. We must write or paint or create transformative experiences for our clients. We are truly alive when we are inspired, and we cannot help but to become inspiration for others. Thank you.
Woo! Wow, that was phenomenal. That was phenomenal. I felt like I was listening to a story.
Yay!
Right? You do it well. You do it well. Oh my gosh. Hearts and loves and jazz hands. That was so incredible. Thank you so much, Cynthia. And what an honor to write the forward of the book. And I am excited for February 14th, 2027.